The storm had taken everything but the land itself. Grant McCoy rode through the broken country at dawn, his horse picking careful steps over downed timber and torn earth. The blizzard had passed in the night, leaving Montana territory white and wounded. Fences lay scattered like matchsticks. Pines older than memory leaned at impossible angles, roots torn free. He'd been checking the grazing route he leased from the railroad. Empty work for an empty man. The money in his saddlebags could have rebuilt every broken fence between here and the Canadian line. But money was all he had left, and it fixed nothing that mattered. His hand brushed the worn Bible tucked in his pack. He'd carried it for 10 years without reading a word. Never learned how. Just like the weight of it, something his mother had held. Something that felt like it meant something, even if he couldn't say what. Grant crested a ridge and stopped. Below, in a valley where Cottonwood Creek bent around a small rise, 2 figures moved through the devastation. An old couple. The man steadied a timber beam while the woman hammered at it with slow, determined strikes. Their homestead lay in pieces behind them, roof collapsed, walls scattered, barn leaning like a drunk. No neighbors within 5 miles. No help coming. Just 2 people past 70 refusing to quit. Grant's chest tightened. His hand moved to the money pouch at his belt, then stopped. Something about the way they worked silent coordination. Dignity in every movement made charity feel like theft. Like offering money would insult something he didn't have words for. The woman missed a nail, shook out her hand, tried again. The man's shoulders shook with effort, but he held the beam steady. Grant whispered to the wind, "Lord, what am I supposed to do here?" It was the first prayer he'd spoken in 10 years, not since the funeral. Not since he'd stood over 2 graves and felt his life end at 35. He dismounted and tied his horse to a standing pine. Then he walked down the hill toward them, boots crunching through snow, heart pounding against ribs that had forgotten how to feel anything but numb. The old man noticed him first, straightened slowly, eyes sharp as cut glass, suspicious, tired. Grant stopped 10 feet away. The woman kept hammering. Silence stretched between them like a canyon. Grant opened his mouth to speak and found he had no idea what to say. "Folks need help." The old man's jaw tightened. "We're managing." The woman didn't even look up, just kept hammering that crooked nail into a beam that would never hold winter. Her gray hair escaped from beneath a wool cap. Her hands, wrapped in strips of cloth, moved with the kind of stubbornness that came from a lifetime of not giving up. Grant surveyed the worksite. Foundation cracked in 3 places. Roof beams too thin by half. No proper chimney stack, just stones piled loose. Winter would return in 3 weeks, maybe less, and this shelter wouldn't last a month. "All stop now," he said quietly. The hammering stopped. The woman finally looked at him. Blue eyes, pale and hard as January ice. "Not because you can't," Grant continued, "because this won't hold. Need stronger joists, seasoned timber. Not green wood. Different foundation stones. I can get all of it. But I build with you, not for you." The old man stepped forward. "We don't take charity. Mr. Not offering charity." Grant met his gaze. "I got money. That's true. Railroad money. But I never built a home in my life. Never learned how. Reckon you could teach me." The woman rose slowly, knees cracking. She studied him like a doctor examining a wound. "What's your name?" "Grant McCoy." "The railroad millionaire?" Not a question. A statement of fact. "We heard about you. Bought half the territory. Then disappeared." Grant's throat tightened. "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" The question hung in the cold air. Grant looked at his hands, soft. Useless hands that had forgotten honest work. "Because I'm tired of running from empty rooms." The old man and woman exchanged a glance. Some wordless conversation that came from decades of marriage. The kind of knowing Grant had lost before he ever really had it. His Bible slipped from his saddlebag and fell into the snow. The woman picked it up. brushed it off, opened it and saw the pages unmarked by understanding. She looked at him. Can't read. Shame burned his face. No, ma'am. She closed the book gently. Then we'll teach you that too. Every evening, after the day's work. The old man extended a calloused hand. I'm Henry Doyle. This is my wife, Martha. You pull your weight. You eat at our fire. That the deal. Grant shook his hand. Henry's grip was strong. His own felt weak by comparison, soft as a child's. Deal, Grant said. Martha handed him a shovel. Then we start by tearing this down to bedrock. Can't build right on a broken foundation. They worked until dark, pulling apart what pride and desperation had tried to force together. By the time stars emerged, the building site was empty again, just cleared ground and possibility. Grant's hands bled. His back screamed. Every muscle he'd forgotten existed made itself known. But when Martha wrapped his hands in clean cloth without a word, when Henry shared his last piece of bread without comment, Grant felt something crack open in his chest, something that felt dangerously close to hope. By the end of the first day, Grant's hands had blistered, bled, and blistered again. They'd spent dawn to dusk hauling stones from the creek bed, digging post holes in frozen earth, clearing debris the storm had scattered across the building site. Honest work. The kind that made muscles shake and breath come hard. The kind Grant hadn't done since he was a boy helping his father. Before the railroad came, before the money, before everything that money bought and ruined. As twilight settled, they built a small fire outside the barn where the Doyles had been sleeping since the storm. The barn still stood, barely, roof sagging but holding, not fit for winter, but enough for now. Martha set out 4 tin plates, Grant noticed, but didn't ask. Some griefs you didn't poke at. Some empty chairs held people who'd never sit there again. They ate in comfortable silence, beans and hard bread. The best meal Grant had tasted in years, because he'd earned it with his hands. After, Martha brought out his Bible and a lantern, opened it to the first page. Genesis. In the beginning. She traced the words with a gnarled finger, spoke them slowly. Grant leaned in, following her movement, sounding out syllables like a child just learning the shape of language. In the beginning. Henry carved notches into a beam beside them, one deep cut. Day 1, he said. We'll mark every day we build, so we remember. Grant stumbled through 5 verses before his eyes blurred and his head ached. But he felt something shift inside him. Some door opening that had been locked so long he'd forgotten it existed. That night, by firelight that cast long shadows across Martha's weathered face, she said, Building starts with a good foundation. Reading too. 1 word, 1 stone at a time. Grant nodded. Couldn't speak past the knot in his throat. Later, alone in his bedroll under the barn's leaking roof, he pulled out paper and pencil from his saddlebag, wrote words he'd never send, to a woman who'd never read them. Sarah, I found people today who don't want my money. They want my hands. They want me to show up and stay. I don't know if I remember how to do that, but I'm going to try. Maybe I can be more than what I lost. Maybe that's enough. He folded the letter carefully, placed it between the pages of Genesis as a bookmark. A prayer to the dead, a promise to the living. For the first time in 5 years, Grant McCoy slept without nightmares. He dreamed instead of timber rising, of walls taking shape, of a door opening onto something he couldn't name yet, but desperately wanted to believe in. Home, by the 7th day. The foundation had become a promise, stone by stone. They'd built it right. Deep footings, level corners, drainage channels for spring melt. Henry taught him the mathematics of load bearing, the logic of how weight wanted to travel through wood and stone. Martha showed him how to read the grain of timber, how to choose straight wood over pretty wood. Grant learned. His hands grew harder. His back grew stronger. The soft man who'd arrived was being replaced by something older, something he'd thought he'd lost forever. At night, they read by firelight. Exodus now. Grant stumbled less, recognized more words. The stories felt different when you earned them through labor, the Israelites building in the wilderness, making something from nothing, learning to be a people. He noticed things. The way Martha and Henry moved around each other without speaking, anticipating needs before they arose. The way they set 4 plates at every meal. 2 for them. 1 for him. 1 that stayed empty. On the 8th day, Grant finally asked, the 4th plate, "Who's it for?" Martha's hands stilled over the evening stew. Henry stopped whittling. The fire crackled into the silence. "Our son," Martha said quietly, "died at Antietam, 23 years old. And our daughter moved to Boston 12 years back." Henry added, "Married a banker. Hasn't written in 7 years. Too busy for old folks, I reckon." Martha's voice softened further. "We've been setting 4 plates since Jacob died. Started taking in strays after orphans passing through. Drifters needing work. Anyone who needed a place. Figured if we couldn't have our own, we'd make room for whoever the Lord sent." Grant's throat closed. He understood suddenly. He was the latest. Another lost soul they'd gathered to their table. Another empty chair they were trying to fill. "I'm honored," he managed. Henry nodded once, went back to whittling. Subject closed. But something had shifted. Grant wasn't a stranger anymore. He was becoming family. On the 9th day, a writer came, Warren Kent, town banker, thin as a rail, eyes cold as calculation. He sat his horse at the edge of the property and didn't dismount, didn't offer to help. Just watched them work with the expression of a man counting other people's failures. "Doyle," he called out. "Need a word." Henry set down his hammer and walked over. Grant and Martha kept working, but both listened. "Property taxes," Warren said. "Still overdue. I gave you an extension through October. That's 2 weeks from now. If the cabin isn't livable and you can't pay, the land forfeits to the bank." Grant's hand moved to his money pouch. Henry saw the movement and shook his head sharply. "No." "We'll have it ready," Henry said, "and we'll pay what we owe. Our debt. Our terms." Warren's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Charity's a fine thing, McCoy, but it don't pay taxes." Grant stepped forward. "How much do they owe? That's between me and them." Henry's voice carried an edge now. "You're here to build, Grant, not to buy." Warren tipped his hat, still smiling that dead smile. 2 weeks, then the land's mine." He rode off without looking back. Martha resumed hammering. Henry returned to the frame they were raising. But Grant saw the old man's hands shake as he lifted the next beam. Pride wasn't stubbornness. It was the last thing poverty let you keep. And money. Grant realized with cold clarity. Couldn't fix this. Only finished shelter and time could... Time they might not have... That night, Grant barely heard the words Martha read. His mind calculated timber needed, work remaining, days left. The math didn't work. Not with 3 people, one of them already struggling. Unless something changed. Unless someone helped. But the Doyles would never ask, and Grant was beginning to understand why asking would break something more important than walls. The walls rose like prayers made solid by the 14th day. The cabin had bones, corner posts anchored deep, wall frames squared and braced. The structure began to look less like hope and more like shelter. But winter's breath came colder each morning, frost thick on the grass, and the deadline pressed against them like a hand on the chest. Martha insisted on a large east-facing window. Henry questioned it precious heat would escape. Glass was expensive. "We need to see the sunrise," she said firmly. "Need to remember we survived the night." Grant understood. They'd survived more than storms. They'd survived loss, poverty, loneliness, a world that had forgotten them. The window wasn't about light, it was about witness, about seeing another day arrive and knowing you'd made it through the dark. He helped Henry frame it larger, double-braced for the extra span, that night, reading by firelight. Grant stumbled through Psalms, made it halfway through the 23rd before his voice cracked on, "The Lord is my shepherd." He stopped, set the Bible down, put his face in his hands. "I had a wife," he said to the fire. "Sarah. She died giving birth 5 years ago in San Francisco. I was negotiating railroad contracts 300 miles away. Didn't make it back in time. Baby didn't survive either. A daughter. Never even held her." Martha's hand found his shoulder. Didn't speak, just held on. "I sold everything after. My father's ranch, the contracts, all of it. Thought I could outrun it. 5 years I've been running, buying things, fixing things. Nothing worked. Nothing filled it. Building a home won't bring them back," Martha said gently. "But it might teach you how to live in one again." Grant nodded, tears on his face, not ashamed of them anymore. Henry spoke for the first time. "I'm dying, son." The words hung in the cold air. "Old war wound, shrapnel in my hip. Doctor in town says I got one more winter of hard work in me. Maybe. This is our last build." Henry's voice stayed steady, matter of fact. "If we can't finish, we lose this land. 40 years we've been here, raised our children here, buried our grief here. This is our last stand." The stakes crystallized. This wasn't just shelter. It was legacy, proof they'd mattered, that their lives had built something that would outlast them. Grant could hire a crew, finish in 3 days, throw money at it like he'd thrown money at every problem for 5 years, but it would steal this from them, make them recipients instead of builders, objects of pity instead of partners in creation. He chose trust over control, the hardest choice he'd made since the funeral. "Then we work together," he said, "however long it takes, whatever comes." Henry extended his hand. They shook on it that night. Grant dreamed of Sarah for the first time in months, but she wasn't dying anymore. She was smiling, standing in a doorway filled with golden light, beckoning him forward. He woke to Martha humming while she made coffee. The sound wrapped around him like a blanket, like the thing he'd been searching for and couldn't name. It sounded like home. Winter came like judgment early, brutal, absolute. The blizzard hit on the 18th day, 2 weeks ahead of normal. Wind screamed out of the north, driving snow horizontal. Temperature plunging 20 degrees in an hour. They'd been framing the roof when the storm struck. Scrambled to get the horses inside, secure tools, find shelter. The half-finished cabin couldn't hold them. No roof yet, no door, wind howling through gaps in the walls like wolves. They retreated to the barn with the livestock, huddled against animal warmth. While the world outside tried to kill them, Grant built a fire in the old stove, fed it carefully through the night, wrapped his expensive wool coat around Martha when he saw her shaking, shared body heat with Henry, felt the old man's fever rising as his cough worsened. The barn roof creaked under the snow load, horses stamped nervously. The storm's voice sounded like every mistake Grant had ever made, screaming his name. Midnight passed. 1 a.m., 2. Henry's cough turned wet and deep. His hands went numb despite the fire. Martha tried to hide her terror, but Grant saw it in the way she held her husband, the way her lips moved in silent prayer. They might not survive till dawn. Grant prayed the only way he knew how, now stumbling through words he'd just learned. "Yo, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." 3 a.m. Henry's fever spiked. He thrashed, delirious, grabbed Grant's hand with desperate strength. "Jacob." Henry's eyes searched Grant's face. "That you, son. You came back. Told your mother you would." Told her. Grant's heart shattered. He gripped Henry's hand, played along. I'm here. Pa, I'm here. Knew you'd come home. Henry smiled, tears on his weathered face. Knew it. Your mother. Tell her I waited. Tell her. She knows. Pa. She knows. Martha wept silently beside them, whispered to Grant. He never got to say goodbye. Never got to see him one more time. You're giving him that? Henry's breathing eased. The fever broke near dawn. He slept finally, hands still gripping Grant's. Morning light filtered gray through the barn walls. The storm had passed. They'd survived barely. Grant stumbled outside into knee-deep snow. The building site was buried, tools scattered. Roof beams they'd raised lay toppled under drifts. 2 weeks of work erased, 2 weeks till the deadline. Impossible now. Mathematically, physically impossible. A rider passed on the road an hour later. Saw the devastation. By noon, the story had spread through town. By evening, Warren Kent stood in the saloon shaking his head sadly, telling anyone who'd listen, shame about the Doyles. McCoy's playing at charity while they freeze. Should have taken my offer to buy them out comfortable. Pride's gonna kill those old folks. Grant didn't know it yet. Didn't know how the town was already writing their failure. He only knew that every muscle screamed, every hope felt broken, and the math said they'd lost. But Martha emerged from the barn at sunrise, saw him staring at the buried work site, and said simply, "We survived the night. That means we build today." Henry followed, pale but walking, cough still rattling. "Ain't beat yet, son." They started digging out the tools, one shovel, one breath, one stubborn act of defiance against a world that said old folks and broken people didn't matter anymore. Grant picked up a shovel and joined them. The cabin stood like a skeleton bones without flesh, promise without completion. Days 19 and 20 passed in exhausted work. They dug out tools, salvaged what the storm had scattered, re-raised fallen beams. But Henry could barely lift timber anymore. His cough hadn't eased. His hands shook constantly now. Martha's face had gone gaunt with exhaustion and fear. 4 days to the deadline. A week's worth of work remaining. The math was simple and cruel. 3 people, 1 injured. All exhausted, couldn't finish in time. The land would forfeit. 40 years of life, erased by a banker's pen. Grant sat alone at midnight, staring at the unfinished cabin by moonlight. He could hire a crew. 20 men could finish this in 2 days. His money pouch held enough to pay them triple wages. But it would steal the Doyles' victory, make them recipients of rescue instead of partners in building. They'd be saved, but something essential would be lost. The thing that made them who they were, the dignity of making their own way. He pulled out his Bible. Hands trembling, he found the Book of Ruth. Read by lantern light, stumbling over words but understanding more now than when he'd started. "Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge." Belonging wasn't built. It was chosen. He pulled out paper, wrote to Sarah's grave for the last time. "I can't bring you home. Can't undo what I failed to do. But I can help someone else keep theirs." Maybe that's what redemption looks like. Not fixing the past, but building something true in the present. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything. He folded the letter, placed it in the Bible, closed the book. Pre-dawn. He was already working when Martha found him. He'd managed to raise 1 beam alone, braced it temporarily, not trying to finish for them, just buying time. 1 piece at a time, whatever he could do. She stood watching him. Didn't speak. Just picked up a hammer and joined him. Henry emerged from the barn minutes later, pale as death, still coughing, but carrying tools. "Together or not at all," he said. They worked in silence as the sun rose. On the ridge above them, a small figure watched. Tommy, the blacksmith's 10-year-old nephew. An orphan himself, living with an uncle who barely noticed him. He'd been watching the whole build. Seen Grant arrive rich and soft, seen him transform through labor and humility, seen the Doyles refuse to quit even when quitting made sense. Something in Tommy's chest burned. Some recognition of what courage looked like, what family could be. He turned his horse and rode hard for town. Grant didn't notice, didn't know the boy was there. He just kept working, one nail, one board, one breath, building not because the math worked, but because showing up mattered more than succeeding. Because love meant staying, even when staying looked like failure. Grant hadn't set foot in a church since the funeral. But on day 21, Sunday morning, with 72 hours till the deadline and the cabin still unfinished, he left Martha and Henry working and rode alone to town, 5 miles through cold morning air. His breath clouded. His hands, now calloused and strong, gripped the reins steady. The church bell rang as he arrived. Folks filed in, talking, laughing, warm in their Sunday clothes. They stared when they saw him. The railroad millionaire. The recluse. Covered in sawdust and mud, smelling of honest work. He tied his horse and walked inside. The service had started, hymns rising. He stood in back, hat in hand, until the singing stopped and the preacher asked if anyone had testimony to share. Grant's legs moved before his mind caught up. He walked down the center aisle. Every head turned. Whispers rippled through the congregation. He stood at the front, facing them all. His voice shook when he spoke. "My name's Grant McCoy. Most of you know that. Know I got railroad money. Know I've been living like a ghost for 5 years?" Silence. Complete and terrible. "I lost my wife in childbirth. Lost my daughter the same day. Been running ever since. Thought money could fill it? Couldn't. Thought staying busy could fix it? Didn't." His voice grew stronger. 3 weeks ago, I met Henry and Martha Doyle. They didn't want my money. They wanted my hands. Wanted me to show up and stay and build something real. He looked at the faces. Some curious, some judgment, some closed off entirely. They're losing their land in 3 days if we don't finish their cabin. I can't do it alone. They can't do it alone, and we shouldn't. None of us should have to build alone. His voice cracked but didn't break. So I'm asking, who'll help finish what we started? Not for money. Not for glory. Just because it's a good thing. Because they've loved that land for 40 years and they deserve to stay. Because that's what neighbors do. The silence stretched so long Grant thought he'd failed entirely. Then movement in the back. Small. A child standing. Tommy, the blacksmith's nephew. 10 years old and thin as wire. "I'll help, mister." The boy's voice carried in the stillness. Every adult in the room felt the shame of being shown up by a child. The blacksmith stood, face red. "I'll bring tools." A widow near the front rose. "I'll bring food." Then families, elders, young couples. Even Warren Kent, looking sick with shame, muttered, "I'll hold off till week's end," and bring lumber. 40 people, a river of humanity flowing toward redemption. They rode out together, a caravan of tools and timber and purpose. Martha and Henry, working alone, heard the hoofbeats, looked up, saw their community arriving. Martha's hand went to her mouth. Henry couldn't speak, just stood there with tears on his weathered face. The work began. Roof beams rose in hours instead of days. Hands that had been idle found purpose. The door was hung, the chimney fired, walls chinked tight. Children carried stones. Elders cooked stew. Young men hauled timber while their wives handed out water. By dusk, the cabin stood complete, solid, warm, whole. Henry carved the final notch into his beam. Day 40. Then added words below in shaking script. Built by many, held by love. Grant stood in the doorway, Martha's Bible in his hands. The crowd gathered quiet. He read aloud. voice clear now, words coming easy, unless the Lord builds the house. Those who build it labor in vain. The congregation murmured, Amen. Tommy stood beside Grant. The boy slipped his hand into Grant's calloused palm. Grant looked down at him. At this orphan who'd shown more courage than any adult, who'd stood when standing was hard. You got a place to stay tonight. Son, Tommy shook his head. You do now, Grant said. The cabin held. Winter came hard after that. But the walls stood firm. The roof shed snow. The chimney drew clean. Inside. Warmth. Outside. Cold. But the line between them held strong. 3 months passed. Snow melted. Wildflowers pushed through thawing earth. Spring arrived like a promise kept. Grant had built a small cabin on the Doyles' land, 1 acre they'd given him. Family rate, Martha said with a smile. Tommy lived with him now, officially, legally. The boy had a father. Grant had a son, not the one he'd lost, but the one life had given him instead. Every evening, Grant taught reading to town children in the Doyles' front room, used his Bible, the one he'd finally learned to understand. Tommy was his best student, hungry for words the way some kids were hungry for food. The table at the Doyles' cabin stayed set for 6 now. Martha and Henry, Grant and Tommy, and 2 empty chairs. For whoever needs them next, Martha said. Warren Kent had paid off their property taxes anonymously, transferred the deed free and clear. He'd left a note Martha showed Grant one morning. You shamed me into remembering I used to be better. Thank you. On a warm April morning, Grant and Henry repaired a fence line together. Not storm damage, just regular maintenance, the work of people who live somewhere and plan to keep living there. Tommy sat on the porch with Martha, sounding out verses. His voice carried across the yard, clear and proud. Grant paused, hammer in hand, and looked at his palms. Calloused now, scarred, strong. The soft hands that had arrived were gone. These were builder's hands, father's hands, hands that knew how to make something that mattered. You happy, son? Henry asked quietly. Grant smiled. Yeah, I am. Good, you earned it. They worked in comfortable silence. The kind that came from knowing you didn't have to fill every moment with words. That presence was enough. That afternoon, a wagon appeared on the road. A family young couple. 3 children. Belongings piled high. The wagon listed badly. 1 wheel cracked. Henry saw them first. Called out before Grant could. You folks need shelter. The couple looked desperate, road-weary, lost. We're heading west, the man said. Broke down. Don't have money for repairs. Henry waved them in. Got a barn you can sleep in, hot food. We'll look at that wheel in the morning. Martha was already heading inside to set more plates. Grant helped the family unhitch their horses. The children stared at him with wide eyes. The youngest, a girl about 5, asked, Are you a cowboy? Something like that. Grant said. Tommy appeared, took the girl's hand. Come on. Miss Martha makes the best biscuits you ever had. The children followed him like he was the Pied Piper. That evening, the table held 9, crowded and loud and perfect. After dinner, Grant stepped outside, looked at the cabin solid, warm, windows glowing gold, looked at the small house he'd built for Tommy and himself, looked at the land, the mountains beyond, the sky going purple with dusk. He'd spent 5 years trying to buy his way back to wholeness, trying to fill empty rooms with things that didn't matter. Turned out, you couldn't purchase a home. You had to build it, 1 nail at a time, 1 word at a time, 1 act of showing up when staying was hard. And once you did, once you put your hands to something bigger than yourself, you realized the truth. You weren't building it for yourself alone. You were building it for everyone who'd come after. For the lost and the weary and the ones who needed to know that somewhere in this hard world, love still stood, solid and true, against every storm. Tommy called from the doorway. "Pa, you coming in?" The word still startled him, still made his throat tight. "Yeah, son, coming." Grant walked toward the light, toward the sound of children laughing, toward the family he'd found by learning to give his hands instead of his money. Behind him, wild roses bloomed around the cabin's threshold, pink and white against weathered wood. Inside, Martha had opened the Bible to a new page. The lesson would continue. The building would continue. The love would continue. One day at a time. One person at a time. One act of grace at a time. Until the whole broken world learned what these 40 days had taught. That redemption doesn't come from running or hiding or buying your way out. It comes from staying, from building, from opening your door to the next lost soul and saying the words that change everything. You need shelter. Come on in. There's always room at this table. Always. The end.